The world has a drug problem, but it's probably not what you might think. The American Medical Association just called it an urgent health crisis, but you may not have yet heard of it. The supply chain issues have caused a shortage of over 100 different medications, some used to treat cancer, cardiac conditions, and even COVID-19. One of the medications is the prescription anti-inflammatory tocilizumab, a drug used to treat both COVID-19 and cancer. Popular drugs like Adderall, Oxycontin, Narcan, and insulin are running low nationwide. The reality is that many of the medicines we use in the United States, they're not simply manufactured in the United States, so they're subject to the same supply chain failures we're witnessing that of container ships adrift off our coastlines. What makes this current shortage alarming is that we don't know how bad it might get. When the supply of medicine falls, it can have immediate and deadly side effects. I often warn that in any post-grid down situation, it's the people who require medications to live normally or who are on drugs that require a gradual tethering off that will be most desperate and will most likely not make it. This video will examine the growing crisis, how it might soon impact you, and some of the possible avenues you can consider to secure the vital medications you need to survive. So let's dive in. Please consider subscribing to our newsletter by clicking on the link in the description and comment section below. If you enjoy this video, please subscribe and click the like button to help the channel grow. It's happened before. This isn't the first drug shortage we've ever faced, so it isn't alarming from that perspective. After Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rican medical and pharmaceutical manufacturers were knocked offline. There was a nationwide shortage of IV bags that hold the saline solution, along with 90 medical products, including 40 or so drugs. Hurricane Maria was a warning for us about how dependent we are upon sole manufacturers and solitary sources for critical medicines. Critical drugs, those with no alternatives, life-saving regimens, are sometimes made by only one manufacturer and may not have a generic version available. They may be the only approved treatment for some medical conditions or diseases. As we explained a few months ago in the video, The Next 6 Months, What to Expect, the flow of pharmaceuticals was in danger of breaking down. It's happening now. I'll link to that video in the cards above. I won't go through that whole video here, but it's essential to understand the flow of pharmaceuticals and how the system works. More than 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs, are manufactured overseas, and China is the source of 40% of the global APIs. The bulk of these ingredients that make up everything from aspirin to antidepressants get shipped to India. 5 years ago, India exported to the United States almost $4 billion worth of pharmaceuticals. That staggering number has only grown exponentially higher over the last half-decade. Strained trading relationships with China, a staggering 28.2 million COVID cases in India, and container ships lined up off the coast are slowing and halting production and the smooth flow of supplies. Manufacturing plant closures, COVID-related trade restrictions, and shipment problems in India and China have dried up the flow of medicines. So, though China has somewhat restored the production of APIs, the output of over-the-counter pharmaceuticals and prescription drugs is experiencing a slowdown. While the inventory of over-the-counter medications is high, panic buying in just regular consumption and expiration of drugs will lead to shortages in most countries. A shortage of one medicine can cause panic buying in another, which further exacerbates the shortage equation. Global trading channels are shaking out their complete shutdown and reopening. Still, the actual production of products is now experiencing disruptions from lack of workers to lack of confidence in the product. Alternative drugs may be less effective. Reactions, dosage problems, and risk of error all accompany having to switch to new medicines. At any given moment, the FDA reports over 100 different drugs currently in shortage. Over-the-counter remedies are often one of the most overlooked preps. The drug problem. The problems with the pharmaceutical industry are many. The first is that many of the drugs we have become dependent upon are manufactured at just one location on long trade routes far from the patient. The second is that there is often no alternative drug available. Also, different countries have different rules as to what their citizens can purchase. The medicine you can get in Mexico is different from what you can get in the US, Australia, Switzerland, or Korea. Sometimes the formulations are different. Sometimes the drug isn't allowed at all. Sometimes you can get as many as you want, and sometimes your quantity is limited to just a few or just a month's supply. The rules are pretty crazy, making it challenging to maintain a suitable inventory of drugs you may need to get you through the disaster and lengthy aftermath. I'm not a doctor and I don't give medical advice. I know that medicines save lives, and some people need certain medications to stay alive and manage physical and mental conditions. While I would never advise a person to go off their medicines or replace them with the herbal medicines or with other pharmaceuticals, the reality is that in a prolonged grid-down situation, a person could be left with no choice. In that situation, you must do research now as to what alternative medicines you could take, what herbal remedies might be out there, or how you can safely survive a cold turkey tethering off of your current medications. Again, be careful and consult your physician. In the case of insulin and other medications, this might not even be a possibility. In that case, at the first sign of disaster, you have to press your medical provider for an extra prescription. If it is a medication that needs to be refrigerated, you need to make sure that you have the means to keep it cold even when the power goes out. That might be at a stream in your area. That might be ice packs in an insulated container. That might be a solar generator and miniature refrigerator. Whatever it is, make sure your medical needs are attended to in your preps. Also expect that others won't prepare. To understand what over-the-counter medicines you will want to have on hand, you can consult my OTC medicine video, which I'll link to in the cards above. Many of these will help alleviate symptoms that will flare up after medicines run dry. More than 131 million people, that's 66% of all adults in the United States, use prescription drugs. Utilization rates are even higher for older folks. Every single year seems to bring a new pill of sorts. In a prolonged grid-down situation or a prolonged drug supply drought, you can expect that 66% of people will have flare-ups of controlled conditions or an even harder time of things. What can you do? In some cases, generics or different formulations may be available. You have experienced a drug shortage if you went to the pharmacy recently and you were prescribed 2 20-milligram pills of your medicine instead of the usual 40-milligram single dose. You may already be experiencing this shortage if your regular pink pill is now orange, or you might be getting a generic in place of your brand name. Pharmacies do have some inventories of drugs on hand, and they may be able to call around to find your particular drug if they're out. What you can do now is to first research the herbal alternative. Drugs are either synthetically created or derived from plants. Knowing what plants make your medicines may be helpful to you should your pharmacy run out. Again, though, I'm not a doctor, so only go this route if all other options and possibilities are exhausted. It's sometimes easier to overdose on an herb than a refined pill derived from that herb. Anyone who forages a wilderness will tell you there are many plants you can eat and plenty that will kill you. Second, if your pharmacy is out of your medicine, some pharmacies are equipped to create an equivalent compound. Your general commercial pharmacy probably doesn't, but smaller pharmacies that are well established likely still blend their own compounds. These are referred to as compounding pharmacies. While this may lack the high potency of your prescription formula, it is an alternative that can keep you alive and treat whatever condition you're using pharmaceuticals for to begin with. It's difficult to know if your pharmacy is just a medicine dispensary or a compound pharmacy that uses advanced pharmaceutical ingredients to formulate drugs for customers. If you are drug dependent, it warrants a conversation with your pharmacist. Explain to your pharmacist that you have concerns about shortages or disaster keeping you from your needed meds. Find out what supplies right now are available. Find out what risks are of suddenly not being able to take your meds anymore. If you have to cut them off suddenly without being able to tether off, how can you safely do that? The time to ask your pharmacist or doctor these questions is right now. After a disaster, they wouldn't have time for you to ask these questions, and the pharmaceutical supply could run dry. Probably your best strategy is to explain these same concerns with your doctor. Take her take on it. See if you can get a script for a longer duration. Find out what substitute and generic drugs are for what you're taking. In an emergency, that information may be helpful to you. If you've ever had to rifle through your medicine cabinets, it might be beneficial to know both the dosage and the name of the generics of the drugs you depend on. In a life or death situation, you may need to take a trip across a border. That's assuming that the border is open, as travel was restricted earlier this year. And there are specific rules that delineate between the act of smuggling and obtaining pharmaceuticals for personal use. Some may be already familiar with these rules, as it is a well-known fact that the cost of a 3-month supply of insulin in the United States is almost $4,000, whereas it is only $600 in Mexico. Nearly 1 million people in California alone cross to Mexico annually for healthcare, including buying prescription drugs. Finally, I have heard of many turning to medicines formulated for dogs, cats, horses, even fish. Fish antibiotics are a common one in the prepping community. I suppose that after an actual SHTF situation, your chances with one of these formulations may hold for you more advantage than risk. Still, you have to realize that animal formulations are mixed differently and not regulated as stringently as human medicine. It's not something you want to be experimenting with after a disaster or SHTF situation. Still, I'm not going to say that it wouldn't be advisable to have something like that on hand and some knowledge of the proper dosage amounts for it if it does actually hit the fan. I'll leave that up to you. Shortages, they can occur for multiple reasons, including compliance with good manufacturing practices, regulatory delay, lack of an active ingredient or inactive ingredient component, delay in shipping, and demand increase for the drug. There are always shortages of some medicines. It's not a perfect supply chain. The current situation is a bit more tenuous, however. The very advanced pharmaceuticals that are used in countries around the world, such as here, Israel, Germany, the UK, China, and more, they're just not guaranteed to be flowing with the same regularity. It isn't a localized natural disaster we might shift and pivot from like Hurricane Maria was. It's a crisis we haven't yet seen the end of. The supply chain failures, they could get far worse before they get any better. Unlike food, where you might have some substitutes and variety, your medicines are supposed to be pretty exact. Prep them like they are as important as your food and water. I'd be interested in hearing the community's take on this. What medicines could you not do without? Is there a plan you have if you should run dry of your supply? Are there any medicine shortages in your country? Let us know in the comments below. What woke you up to begin to prepare? What's your prepping plan? I try to read me in the comments and respond to them when I can. That's typically within the first hour of releasing a video. I can notify you when other videos become available if you take that step to subscribe to the channel. As always, please stay safe out there.